Welcome to the West Ham Voice. Thank you for joining me. It's a bit of a reflection on what's been happening on and off the pitch over the last few days, which is giving me or giving all of us a bit of an insight as to what's going on in Graham Potter's mind. Um, if you're new to this channel or if you've watched the West Ham Voice before but not yet become a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It costs nothing to subscribe and all the content is free. And if you enjoy the content, please do hit the like button. So, with the breaking news on Tuesday that Edson Alvarez had been told that he can find a new club this summer, and with the subtle way that Max Kilman was given the armband by Jared Bowen rather than handing it to Tomas Soucek in the game against Southampton on Saturday, it looks to me that Graham Potter has already made his mind up as to which of our central midfielders he wants to keep at the club and which he wants to let go of next season. Now, when we look at the squad as a whole, fans could argue that almost every position needs to be reviewed and overhauled, with the possible exception of our right side. Aaron Wan-Bissaka will continue to be our first choice right back for a few years yet. And despite all the noise from the pundits urging Jared Bowen to consider his future, Jared Bowen is unlikely to be leaving West Ham United anytime soon. But then you look at other positions, and one could argue that maybe the goalie position needs to be reviewed. A lot of people argue that Areola doesn't command his 18-yard box. Great shot stopper, but not very commanding. And given that Graham Potter likes to utilize his goalie almost as a centre back, taking the ball out, using his feet to sort of move the whole team further forward, Areola isn't quite that sort of keeper, is he? But I don't think the goalie slot at this moment in time is necessarily high on Graham Potter's list of priorities to replace, unless, of course, we get Kelleher at a bargain price. Now, as for the defence, is Kelleher on a free contract? I can't remember. Anyway, as for the defence, you could argue that Potter's kind of fixed things in a way as best he can. Clearly, we're not letting in cricket score size goals. We are, when we concede, it's the odd goal here and there. Still means that we're losing games, but on the whole, he's tried to fix defense as best he can. But we know that we could still do with a couple of decent centre backs to replace Mavropanos and possibly a Gerd if he doesn't come back. And perhaps we need backup players for our fullbacks, with the likes of Walker Peters being considered as a free agent this summer. And then, of course, we know that the striker situation is also another area that we need to fix. And we know all too well that if we sell someone like Mohamed Kudus, who apparently is 99% certain, according to some stories on Tuesday, that he's definitely leaving the club. I think we know he's leaving the club anyway. But we sell someone like Mohamed Kudus, and that could fund a really good striker in this summer window. So we know we've got a number of positions that we need to sort out. Our left side of midfield as well. We've been sorely missing Crescencio Somerville, so the sooner he returns, the better. But of course, we probably want to have someone as backup for him as well. Who knows? Maybe Max Cornet will come back and be his backup, whilst Luis Guilherme continues to learn his trade and becomes a backup for Bowen. But you're getting the gist. We do need players around most parts of the pitch. But the one thing missing that we all agree on, and the one thing that all our current central midfielders have in common is pace in midfield. And that's been crying out, in abundance for maybe a couple of seasons now. So yes, we can look at the keeper. Yes, we can look at our defenders. Yes, we can look at the striker situation. But the gaping hole at this moment in time is central midfield and the lack of pace. Now, I'm excluding Mohamed Kudus and the likes of Luis Guilherme from that because they're primarily wide players. But if you look at the likes of James Ward-Prowse, Carlos Soler, Paqueta, Guido Rodriguez, Tomas Soucek, Andy Irvin, and Edson Alvarez, not one of them can be really be regarded as players who have got a lot of pace about them. In fact, a lot of them have got no pace about them at all. And we've needed a box-to-box midfielder for longer than we all care to remember. Now, Declan Rice was not necessarily the typical box-to-box midfielder when he was at West Ham, but he's kind of grown into one at Arsenal, has he not? Our central midfield is not combative enough, and it is painfully slow. And then we wonder why we concede we lose a lot of games and we're not able to provide the sort of defensive cover for our defense and the attacking prowess for our attackers. If we bring in two pacey, decent box-to-box midfielders in this summer transfer window, we could see a completely transformed West Ham United next season. Graham Potter has given every single central midfielder in the current squad some playing time to see if any of them can fulfill the style of football that he wants his team to deliver. But alas, not one of them has been able to do that. And when fans ask, well, why is James Ward-Prowse playing instead of Alvarez or Soucek? The answer is quite simple. He will follow the head coach's lead in what he wants the player to produce. He's not the fastest, but he's technically a lot better on the ball than Soucek or Alvarez is. And if you look at the three midfielders that Potter has been using over the last few games, they've been kind of players like Soler, Paqueta, and Ward-Prowse. They've been players who are better at using the ball than Alvarez or Soucek can. And if you look at Graham Potter's midfield when he was at Brighton, he had that kind of dynamic. He had that good mix of combative players and pacey players and players who could use the ball well. Players like Alexis McAllister and Moises Caicedo were just that. They had pace, they're combative, they're technically good with the ball, and they were the kind of players that made that Brighton team click. Now, Potter has given both Soucek and Alvarez enough playing time since his arrival at the club, but he's clearly not been getting what he wants from them. With Alvarez, he seemed to be one of Potter's go-to players when Potter arrived. And then from the home game against Leicester till now, Alvarez's game time has been steadily reducing. He had 66 minutes against Leicester, 65 against Newcastle, no minutes at all against Everton, just only a half against Wolves, 54 minutes against Bournemouth, and no game minutes at all against Liverpool, culminating in him not even being on the bench against Southampton last weekend. Now, on my live show on Monday night, a viewer stated, and I've since seen it corroborated, that Fabrizio Romano had reported that Alvarez had a back problem, hence missing the game at the weekend. However, as I mentioned in my Monday night show, Alvarez took part in the training session just the day before the game. So maybe, as I suggested, he may have picked up a late knock during training or after, which would have made him unavailable for selection against Southampton. Or simply, there was no injury, but it was a convenient excuse to use to explain Alvarez's absence. And with Soucek, much the same thing. 7 games under Potter, where he played the full 90 minutes. But over the last 4 games, he's either played few minutes or has remained on the bench. Now, strangely enough, I did suggest that we missed both those players against Southampton at the weekend. Not necessarily pacey, but we know Soucek gets stuck in there. We know Alvarez can as well. But Potter thinks otherwise. Despite Soler starting, I don't really think Soler is actually part of Potter's plans next season. But perhaps Potter wanted to see a little bit more of a fluid midfield three, like I've said, with players who were technically more proficient on the ball than Alvarez and Soucek are. But alas, despite their technical proficiency, players like Soler, Paqueta and Ward-Prowse lack pace and that box-to-box ability. So here we are. Potter seems to have now decided who he doesn't want to keep at West Ham. But if he's already advised Alvarez that he's free to find a new club, or Alvarez's agents that they're free to find Alvarez a new club, I think that means Potter and Carl McCauley have not only identified replacements for the likes of Alvarez and Soucek, but probably have been quietly negotiating deals for those replacements to be at West Ham early in the summer transfer window. I can't imagine otherwise why Potter would be making such a bold statement to Alvarez that he can find another club if a deal for his replacement has already not been agreed. Look, I don't really think that Potter has fought. I know we've started to hear these stories again about Potter falling out with Alvarez and Soucek and other players, etc. I don't really think that's the case, to be quite honest with you. I think Potter is quite clear with the players. He's been quite eloquent in the way he's been speaking to the players and about the players, eloquent speaking to the press, etc. I just think it's one of those things. I just think Potter has made the decision that he needs to be heading in a different direction in his central midfield. And alas, Alvarez and Soucek are just not part of that process, next year's process. Potter is shaking things up. And as much as many fans already don't want Potter at the club next season, I think he's well on his way to rebuilding the squad in order to have a more combative team in the Premier League next season.